Hello and welcome back to another Walking Dead video, and today we'll be doing my review for Daryl Dixon Season 1 Episode 5, and all the other reviews were saying this is the best episode of the season. So today we will be doing my review and talking about, were those early reviews right? Is this easily the best episode so far? So this episode has not one but three storylines. We have the main storyline with Laurent and Daryl heading north to the nest. We also have the storyline in Paris with Isabelle and Quinn, and then we have this flashback storyline in America showing us how Daryl got to France. But before we talk about all three of these storylines and break them down, one thing I do want to mention is the intro actually changes. In the first 4 episodes, the intro ends with Daryl looking over at Paris, but the intro for this episode ends with Daryl and Laurent looking over at the nest. It's such a small thing, but I do quite like the developing intro showing where our characters are in this story. But moving to the actual episode, as I said, it's got 3 plots and all 3 of them are pretty good. The only issue I have is because you have all these plots, the first half of this episode does feel a little slow. The pacing is a little slow because you have Isabelle back in Paris with Quinn and she's still trying to get out of the situation that she's stuck in. And then you have Daryl and Laurent trying to head north and then bonding. And then you have the flashback just showing how Daryl got to France. And because you have all this moving, the overall episode feels like it's moving very slow until the point where the Laurent and Daryl story and the Isabelle and Quinn story merge into one. And that's when Madam Genet comes in and Laurent, who absolutely does nothing in this episode. That's my biggest flaw of this episode. Laurent does nothing, and he's underused in this episode, but Madam Genet gets time to shine, and once she is in this episode, and Daryl and Laurent and Quinn and Isabelle kind of mix together into one plot, that's when the episode really picks up, and that's what halfway through this episode is when everything all picks up and everything gets really, really interesting. The first half is not bad at anything, it's still great, I just feel like it's a bit too slow for my liking, and there's quite a lot going on. And the only thing I think they could have done differently would be to remove the Daryl flashback plot and focus more on Isabelle and Quinn in Paris and Daryl and Laurent to their journey north. And you could have definitely fleshed out Daryl and Laurent's relationship, because as soon as it's just them two, they link back up to the other plot and you don't really get time to deep dive Daryl and Laurent being on their own and bonding. Even though the Daryl flashback plot is really good, you could have removed it to do more with those two characters, I feel. But then you could argue, where else would you put it in the season? Yeah, it makes no sense. It would have to go in this episode. My only gripe with the Daryl plot before it merges up and we get Madam Genet is that there's a shot that comes basically out of nowhere. We have Daryl and Laurent, they're trying back to the boat, and something happens, and Laurent's done something stupid, and then Daryl has a massive hissy fit, like, what the hell, Laurent? You're such a stupid person. And Laurent does the speech that Ellie gives Joel in The Last of Us, and it doesn't feel earned. Like, Daryl and Laurent haven't really had scenes together. We haven't seen them really bond. They've had maybe some scene in episode 2 and a bit in this episode, but they haven't really had these bonding moments because we haven't properly seen their journey to Paris. So when Laurent's like, I lose everybody, I don't want to lose you too, and basically doing an Ellie scene from The Last of Us, I didn't feel anything, and I felt like we should have had more time with just Daryl and Laurent, so that moment would have felt like it meant something. I just felt they rushed to those two characters have this bond where we really haven't seen it properly been fleshed out and properly happen, and that probably should have happened with Isabelle and Laurent. That little conversation would have worked better with those two characters, not Daryl, who has seen this kid and known this kid for a couple months or weeks. We don't know what the timeline is because we completely skip the journey to Paris. And this goes back to my issue with Paris should have been introduced in episode 4, maybe it had 2 episodes to properly develop Daryl and Laurent's relationship. Because now I need to move on to, because I'm going to talk about that and it'll get me into the Last of Us thing. But move on to the Isabelle plot. That's fine. I can't really take anything away from that. There's no little issues other than this one throwaway line where Quinn says he's been waiting 12 years to give Isabelle this jewelry. Is that 12 years since he found her, or 12 years meaning he had it before the apocalypse fell? I hope it's not before the apocalypse fell. It's just those little things. It happened in Fear where they retconned the final season, and it looks like this show they're retconning itself to take place in the 12th year of the apocalypse. but that's during the end of season 10. The Walking Dead season 11 takes place in the 13th and ends in the 14th, roughly, year. So it's just little things like that. If you're not a massive Walking Dead fan, you wouldn't notice it. But if you're one of those sad people like me who notice little things in the timeline like that being retconned, it just completely is a bit infuriating. You have all these showrunners just not really knowing where their show takes place in the timeline. But now let's talk about the flashbacks, because I want to talk about the ending completely by itself. But the flashbacks show us how Daryl got to Paris, and that is that he ran out of fuel, he met up with some guys to go and get fuel, and then we see this like kind of, he's got to go out and he's got to get some walkers, and it's tying into how he got onto the boat. And the whole reason he gets on the boat is because he sees a kid that he doesn't really like, found out that he was killed, punches a guy, and then he gets sent on a boat. And initially thinking about that, I'm like, wow, Daryl's stupid. And then I remember Daryl has a history of lashing out on people and having it backfired and getting arrested. Or, not arrested, captured. That is like Daryl's whole thing. Oh, you killed this guy. Whack you. Now I'm going to go thing. It's what he did to, like, Negan. So, it is fully within Daryl's character to get captured for the smallest thing possible, just whacking one guy once for basically very little reason about a character he didn't really care about. So the way he was actually made to Paris makes sense. It's in Daryl's character, and we do see some really cool scenes. We see how Daryl escaped the boat, and we see runners. Like Daryl first comes up to a runner, and one downside, I did not like Daryl's reaction. He didn't really go like, what the hell is that? He whacks it one and jumps off the boat. I wanted a big reaction. There is no big moment like Negan in The Walking Dead where he sees the walker climb and then he goes, what? Then he drops an F-bomb. He's kind of stunned. Daryl doesn't have that. He just goes, oh, whack, jump. I definitely think they should have done something more. Daryl was not really reacting to these variants like we wanted him to. We're losing our minds over the variants, and then the characters in The Walking Dead, they saw a walker climb once, and then they're like, we've seen all variants, we've seen the runners, we've seen the burners, they don't care. And I just felt that was a little annoying that there wasn't a moment for Daryl to be completely shocked by the runner. Another quick thing about the Daryl Dixon flashback I do want to talk about is that Carol returns in a cameo. She is over the radio, so she hasn't returned in person, but there's a scene where Daryl and Carol talk over the radio, and she mentions something about someone returning, and then silence. I'm definitely going to make a whole new video about this, so I'm not going to deep dive into it right now, but wow, I did not expect to see Carol again, and this thing, it's going to be something big. I have to say it right now. It's going to be something big. But moving on to the ending where the two plots are merged together and we get Madam Genet and her speech. I absolutely loved her speech. And it's shot so well where you have Daryl in prison and you have Madam Genet delivering her speech about unifying France and wanting to free everybody. And you get this kind of cut between Daryl escaping the past, and you got Daryl in the past escaping the boat, dealing with the variants, and you got Daryl in handcuffs being taken towards this arena, and the speech is just absolutely amazing. The ending itself, I will have to say, is a bit of a tease, because it's just this amazing moment where it's just building up, and Daryl's in the arena, her weapon's put down, her speech is still going on, she calls Daryl the enemy, and then the variant, like Super Walker, comes out, and it seems that all the variants are going to just be artificial. Like, we can see in the flashback that the runner was caused by the scientist, so it seems like there are not kind of natural variants to the Walker virus. The Walker virus is not natural by any needs, but there's no natural variants, which is a bit sad, but it was absolutely amazing, the build up to this massive Walker. I really hope Daryl doesn't take it out immediately in the final episode, because we literally have this build up to this Walker. He gets shot, we see the Walker turn and his eyes go black. He gets released and Daryl picks up the weapon and the Walker just sprints at him, and then it's like cut to black. Hopefully at the start of episode 6 it's not just Daryl diving underneath and cutting his head straight off. We better get like a good 5 to 9, no, I might say 10 minutes, but that could be a bit much. I want at least 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes or Daryl gets help to take out the variant. I do not want Daryl to kill this variant Walker at the start of episode 6 by himself. I hope they're the freedom fighters, or that's what I'm going to call them, and Isabelle and Laurent help Daryl take out this variant. And the way the story is now, I definitely don't see them getting to the nest by the end of the episode. I think the end of episode 6 is going to be them escaping Madam Genet's castle, and season 2 about them trying to get Laurent there. And that'd be better. I really hope they do that and they're not rushing towards the nest. We know we see the nest. We've seen it in the trailers. Hopefully they do not get there. Maybe we just get a shot of the nest and they do not get there. But let's move on to my one sentence, that's one word overall review. And I just have to say, this is a fantastic episode and give it a 10 out of 10. This is easily the best episode of the season. It is not perfect. There are some really, really small things I dislike. I feel like it's slightly paced a bit oddly, and they could have done a bit more with developing Laurent and Daryl's relationship, and Codron could have done a little more. However, it is nearly flawless. It's a fantastic episode, and it is a 10 out of 10, and I don't see episode 6 being as good as episode 9. But please tell me down below, what did you think about episode 5 of Daryl Dixon? Did you love it? Did you hate it? I'll just know all your thoughts down below. But this is it for me today, so goodbye, peace out, and I'll see you in my next video.